Volume 13. Holy shit! Greetings, Ventures. This is Lord, and welcome to my review of Danja ni Dae wo Moteru no wa Machigataru Daruka, Volume 13, or as you may probably know it as, Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, or DanMachi, Volume 13, and of course my favorite name for the story, Familia Myth, because that was the name Omori Sensei gave the series before it got officially published. But, as you already know, this series is written by Fujino Omori Sensei, it's illustrated by Suzuhito Yasuda, translated this time by Winifred, who's done the previous two volumes as well, 11 and 12, and of course this is being published by Yen Press. And with the way I structure my reviews, first I'll be doing a spoiler-free general review of Volume 13, and then I will go into some more spoiler talk with the certain points I want to get across, but I will leave a skip to that in a timestamp in the description below if you want to just skip to that part of the video. And also, when I do start getting into spoiler talk, I will leave a timestamp for that as well if you don't want to see those points talked about quite yet because you haven't read Volume 13 yet. So without further ado, let's get started into the review of Volume 13. Now, with Volume 13, we're immediately brought back to the point where we left off in Volume 12 with a slight cliffhanger that basically says that Ryu may possibly be involved in some type of murder, and Volume 13 immediately opens up with that, and you can already tell that it's going to be a volume filled with questions, filled with Bell, and having him struggle with his belief in Ryu, and just wanting to get the answers. And then, as the novel keeps going on, the situation just gets more and more tense, and it gets borderline scary at the very end, but also it's very captivating and thrilling all at the same time. Now, the novel flows really well, and like I said before, it flows directly from Volume 12, which provides a lot of background information. It provides a lot of setup for what happens here in Volume 13, because originally the story in Volume 12 wasn't going to be written the way it was, because Omori Sensei originally wanted to go into the arc that's being introduced here in Volume 13 from the get-go and not have Volume 12, but I think Volume 12 did a good job. It's like that nice break from the Xenos arc, and Volume 12 really does help illustrate how the middle levels are in the dungeon, and that really helps build a lot of context and world building for the stuff here in Volume 13. It helps the pace of Volume 13 flow very well because we got a lot of descriptions out of the way with Volume 12. And you can see here in Volume 13 how Bell has grown and what he's learned just from the experiences in Volume 12, and of course the experiences he's had over the course of the entire series. But there are things from 12 that are addressed here, and Bell looks back to that really helps him decide and figure out stuff that was a mystery. But he uses that knowledge that he's learned. You see him experimenting Volume 12 with Firebolt and the Hestian Knife to make Argo Vesta, and again you see him experimenting with some stuff here and just taking his experiences and applying them in new ways to help him advance through the plot here in Volume 13. And it's really cool to see because before, like in Volume 1, you would never see this type of Bell, so it's really cool to see where he was in Volume 1, running away from the Minotaur, to where he is right now in Volume 13, just heading right into danger, but also being cautious, and having a lot more knowledge, because he's constantly trying to learn more and more about the dungeon, especially after the Xenos arc, because he's been drilled by Aina constantly before this expedition. So it's really cool to see Bell progress as a character. You just continuing to progress as a character as the series goes on. It's really a beautiful thing to see, and Omori Sensei does a great job with his main character. And of course, Bell is being challenged here in Volume 13 because Ryu is being accused of murder, and he wants to get to the bottom of this. He wants to believe in Ryu, who's helped him countless times. And there is a point in this novel where he almost makes enemies of people that could be potential allies, and he gets reprimanded for that by Lily and Aisha, because even though Bell is progressing as a character, sometimes he is acting too rashly. But Bell, don't lose sight of that. Don't lose sight of your belief, because that's part of what makes you you. And it's because of those characters surrounding Bell that he's able to make some mistakes, but they're there to pull him back and support him. Because this isn't a story about Bell alone. He's being supported by his comrades. And one of them in specific right here is Cassandra, who gets a lot of focus in Volume 13 because she gets these visions, these prophecies, if you will, of certain events that may happen depending on whether or not she is able to change them. And she struggles a lot with the prophecies that she has in this volume, and she tries really, really hard to get people to believe in her, but they don't necessarily do. But all the same, she tries to go about that alone. And even Bell, he does notice that something is wrong with Cassandra, and like the leader he's trying to be, he does recognize that and try to help her. But Cassandra is able to make some progress on the prophecies, and because of the introduction with the prophecies, it does provide the reader with like this tensity in the novels, because as you're reading throughout volume 13, you're like, okay, when is this prophecy going to happen? Like, is this what this was? And then you're just wondering what other events could transpire that might relate to these prophecies. So those prophecies, the existence of them does give a good sense of tension throughout the novel, even though it might not necessarily need that, because this novel is very, very tense. There are certain scenes in this novel that almost play like something out of a horror film regarding a specific monster. And it's just crazy to see all these descriptions, like all these grotesque descriptions of what the monster looks like and what it's doing in this novel. You can really tell how far this series has come, because in the first few novels, this story just felt a bit lighthearted, and then as the story kept going on, especially through the Xenos arc, you can see the story just maturing more and more. And we're finally reaching this point where if this volume were to be animated, and I really do hope it is, it would need like a super late night TV slot, because this goes beyond shonen stuff right now with what's exactly happening in this novel, and it's very, very exciting to see the series grow in this way. And again, in this volume, like in volume 12, Bell is put in a situation where he sometimes has to work alone, and that gives us two different perspectives that we have to look at throughout the novel, and I think Omori Sensei does a good job illustrating the two perspectives, that being the Hestia Familia Expedition Group, and then Bell's perspective as well. And I think he juggles the two very well, because the story unfolds in such a way where the two perspectives are very important to something that does happen towards the latter half of the novel, and I think it's handled really, really well. And anytime the group is showcased without Bell, you can really see them working together, because they can accomplish things without the level 4 Bell. You have Haruhime that has the level boost, you have Mikoto who has a detection skill and the gravity ability, you have Welf with his magic swords, and being a high smith, he can repair stuff in the dungeon. He can make quick stuff in the dungeon itself, which you might see in this novel as well. And of course, Lily is like the brains of the operation, having the knowledge of the dungeon, as well as being able to keep everyone level-headed, because sometimes, like in the beginning of the novel, Bell is acting a bit too rashly, and Lily's part of the people that helps cool Bell off, and that's what makes Lily so valuable in the party. And then of course you can't forget the other non-Hestia Familia members in Aisha, Daphne, Cassandra, Chigusa, and Oka, who all play a very big part in helping the group succeed where they are in volume 13. So again, Omori Sensei does a very good job of juggling the roles of his characters and giving them all a spotlight when necessary. And the final fight scenes with Bell are some of the most compelling and exhilarating fights to read in the series, because there's just a lot of tension regarding what's happening in those scenes, and they are complemented very, very well by Yasuda-san's illustrations. Like, they really add a whole other level to the situation that's happening between Bell and his predicament in this later half of this volume. And I know some people may complain about how powerful Bell is becoming throughout these novels. Like, is it happening too quickly? Is it unearned? But I believe Omori Sensei is doing a very good job with Bell's growth, because everything does feel earned. Like, Bell had the struggle, he suffered, he learned from those experiences, and then succeeds after learning from them. Like, nothing here is unearned. Like, to get level 2, Bell had to fight against a trained Minotaur, something that normal people, like just advancing the usual way, normally wouldn't have to face. And then on his way to level 3, he had to do that war game against Apollo Familia with a party of 5 people against a Familia consisting of over 100 members. And then on his way to level 4, he had to fight against Dix and Nicholas Familia, as well as fighting against Asterios. Though weakened, Asterios in Volume 12 was classified by the guild as a level 7 monster, and Bell was level 3 at the time, and not exactly holding his own, but putting up a fight. And then in Volume 12, he was able to beat DanMachi Huge after basically losing to it once, and then after he comes back, because he's been experimenting with his Firebolt and the Hestia Knife, he was able to make use of a new move called Argo Vesta and defeated DanMachi Huge. So he's had to fail, learn from those experiences, and then use that knowledge from those failed experiences to succeed. So I think everything that Bell has accomplished so far is very well deserved and earned. And like I said before, Bell wouldn't be able to accomplish all this without the support of his supporting cast. And the reason he has the supporting cast is because he's earned their trust. Like, even though Bell is the hero, the star of the show, he wouldn't be able to get where he is right now without the support of the people he vows to protect. Because this is the story of the hero, his friends, the story of the Familia myth. So overall, Volume 13 was an exhilarating and captivating read, and it gets really, really intense towards the latter half of the volume, where you can't even put your book down because it's just so engrossing reading the story play out. And unfortunately, the story stops on a big cliffhanger, and it just leaves you wanting more right now, but the next book doesn't come out until 5 more months, so I believe this is going to be possibly the hardest 5 months we've had to wait between volumes. But Volume 13 is a very rewarding volume to read, I think, because even though it ends pretty abruptly, I think the climax is handled very well, and there is a good amount of action and world building included in Volume 13, and you just want to see the next phase in the story. And that concludes my general review of Volume 13. So if you don't want to see the spoiler points I'll be discussing next in the video, please go ahead and go to the video description, click the timestamp to skip to the end of this video. But now I would like to dive straight into Volume 13 and discuss some of my favorite scenes, and also discuss some of the points that I would like to address that unfold and we discover in Volume 13 itself, and how it may lead up into Volume 14 in the future. Alright, and immediately I would like to talk about my favorite character, Ryu. In the opening pages of this book, we actually see a first-person point of view of Ryu. And I think this might be like the first time we ever seen Ryu's first-person point of view, because we haven't even had that in the Familia Chronicle episode of Ryu, because that's pretty much all in third person. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this might actually be the first time we've had a first-person point of view from any character besides Bell. But I think that is very interesting, and it just makes you, that those first few pages of the book with Ryu's point of view just make you feel really, really bad for Ryu, and you really, really hope that she gets over her survivor's guilt, and I'll address that a bit more later on in this spoiler discussion. But because I want to go through stuff, and hopefully in chronological order, but I'll probably skip around anyway. But we can see in this volume that Bell is struggling with believing in Ryu, and what's presented in front of him during that initial murder scene. Because Bell wants to believe in Ryu, but there's a lot of evidence that points to Ryu having some sort of involvement with that man in floor 18. But like I said, how we see how Bell has grown so far in the series, Bell immediately knows something is off with the way that the accusations are going on. Because of that werewolf Turk, which we later discover was working with Jura, the last remnant of Rudra Familia, whom Ryu thought she eradicated, but Jura survived. And that's why Ryu basically went into rage mode, because she saw someone that shouldn't be alive. She saw someone that was a reminder of her past, of the annihilation of her Familia, Estrella Familia. And during that initial murder investigation scene, we see that Bell tried to butt heads with Boris and the rest of the residents. And in that initial floor 18 investigation scene, we see Bell try to butt heads with Boris and the rest of the people because of his faith in Ryu. And like I mentioned before in the general review, Aisha and Lily were quick to take Bell away from that scene because they don't want to make enemies of those people, because they do eventually end up taking part in that expedition to find Ryu, and they wouldn't be able to do that if Bell made enemies of those people. But we do see Bell learn from that mistake, and as Cassandra is trying so desperately to get people to believe in her prophecies, Bell kind of kills two birds with one stone with how he handles that situation with Cassandra, who's trying to stop Aisha from following Bell into delving down with the main group who's trying to find Ryu. Because Bell appeases Cassandra by getting Aisha to stay behind, and also Bell tells Aisha to keep an eye on Turk because he's very suspicious of the lad, and that was a very good decision on Bell's part, because turns out Turk was working with Jura. And I'll mention Cassandra's efforts once again, because you see Cassandra trying to fight that prophecy, and she tries to do something, like anything that could change the outcome of that grotesque description of her prophecy, with basically everyone dying except Bell for some reason. But she does end up getting wealth to make that Goliath scarf, which helps a lot, as we can see in this volume with Bell. And the one cool thing with the Glide Scarf is that you can see Bell immediately tried to like experiment with it. Like, you know, he knows it's very durable and he tries to use it as a weapon. And then after experimenting with it as a weapon, he uses it later on at the very end of this novel with that fight against the Juggernaut, at the Scarf as a defensive device and a weapon at the same time. So it's really cool to see Bell continue to experiment with stuff, as we saw in Volume 12 with him experimenting with Firebolt and it amplifying the Hestia knife. And then back to Volume 12 again, we know that someone lost their arm and there was a lot of blood that came from that, and that's actually used as a point when Bell is trying to be like Mr. Detective Bell with Jura, who said that Ryu basically severed his arm, but that actually happened about 5 years ago because Bell noticed that, like, hey, you didn't lose enough blood to say that your arm was just severed. And of course Ryu, in a rage, like, yeah, I did cut off his arm. But you didn't seem to mention, Ryu, that happened 5 years ago. And with Jura being the remaining remnant of Rudra Familia, being part of the evils, just his involvement in this plot, even though he's pretty much working alone, except with Turk, of course, but pretty much an evil that's working alone. We do get information from that because now we know that Gnosis probably extends down into the deep levels because they were able to bring those monsters like the Lambton that the main group and Bell and Ryu had to fight in this volume. The evils are also capable of acquiring magic items that can tame these beasts from the deep levels. So that's very worrying, and that helps build up some of the power that the evils do hold. Like, we get a lot of that in Sword Oratoria, but we're starting to see more and more of it here in the main series as well. And because of Jura, we learn a lot more about Ryu's past, how Estrella Familia had a good amount of level 4s and 3s, and they all died against this Juggernaut that freaking Jura summoned, the Mad Lad. And Jura states that Ryu was only able to drive back the first Juggernaut. It doesn't sound like she defeated it, but at least drove it back by sacrificing her friends in the Estrella Familia. Now, we don't know exactly what the context of that is. Like, did she use her Familia members as bait? Or what exactly happened down there? But we do know Ryu carries a big amount of survivor's guilt towards what happened down there in the dungeon. So much so that she made Estrella leave Arario before she was going to try and eradicate Rudra Familia, with the exception of Jura. So we probably will learn more about that situation in Volume 14, but it's very, very interesting seeing what may have happened down there 5 years ago in the dungeon with Estrella Familia. And I think that this is something that Ryu, like, she has to go past. She hasn't gone past it for 5 years. It's like the past 5 years was just her almost running away, trying to start a new life, but she's still being haunted by that survivor's guilt, and I don't think she'll be able to get over it until she actually accepts what's going on and helps Bell defeat the Juggernaut that actually is still alive and follow them down into the floor 37 where they both end up. And I think Ryu has to face Estrella and own up to what exactly happened down there 5 years ago. And Ryu does find Estrella, which probably will be with like the help of Hermes Familia, finding Estrella out there somewhere in Arario, because Hermes Familia is familiar with the areas outside of Arario, being almost like a messenger familia for the guild. I do hope that Ryu does a conversion from Estrella Familia to Hestia Familia, because you know that Ryu constantly goes down into the dungeon. We know in the Familia Chronicle episode Ryu that she can't help but want to help people. Like here in the latter half of Volume 13 with the fight against Juggernaut, when Bell is pretty much down for the count, or we think he's down for the count, and the Juggernaut's about to attack Boris, Ryu is conflicted. Like, I want to stay here with Bell and help him, but Boris is about to be attacked over there, and like you hear the words in her head, I want to help them. Like, Ryu still has that side of her that wants to help people, and these are the same people, like Boris, sent down the expedition of people to go and hunt down Ryu and basically kill her for killing residents of floor 18, even though she did no such thing. But Ryu still has that spirit inside of her to want to help people. Like, I haven't read any spoilers about Volume 14 because I want to experience the story for myself the way it's meant to be experienced by reading the actual text and not reading a summary. Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but depending whether or not Ryu has a lot of guilt with what happened with Estrella Familia, like maybe she did use him as baits, or what exactly happened down there. But whatever the case, I hope that she like owns up to that, goes to Estrella and gets a conversion to Hestia Familia, because she seems to want to still be an adventurer, and I think like it would be a really cool thing to see like Belle say like, if you really do regret what happened and wish to atone, then stay an adventurer and help us, or something like that, because I think that'd be a really cool scene. But also with me wanting Ryu to join Hestia Familia, that really does like balance out their party, because right now Hestia Familia is like level 4 Belle, level 2 Welp and Mikoto, and then like, and here's everyone else being level 1. So having another character that's high level would really help out the Familia. And with Ryu specifically, she's been level 4 for 5 years, and she's been periodically visiting the dungeon to go down to that grave sites in floor 18, so she's had to defeat monsters then. She had it all escapade in an episode Ryu. She's helped against the Black Goliath. She was like the main fighting force during that fight. Lily said in volume 6 that it's more than likely that Ryu got most of the auxilia from that fight, and then we know Ryu helped against the fight against some of the Xenos down in floor 18 in volume 10, and also she fought against Eyes Wallenstein herself in volume 11, and then Ryu's gonna be doing more and more stuff here in volume 13, and then of course in volume 14. And by the time that Belle and Ryu get out of this situation, if Ryu does get her status updated, I would think that she's gonna be level 5 by the time she gets out, because she's been through a lot of stuff in these 5 years just being level 4. And more than likely, Belle's probably going to be level 5 by the end of this as well. Depending on how many more crazy enemies Belle has to fight down here, like she's already fought the Moss Huge in volume 12, he's fought against a Lambton, and then the Juggernaut, and which will probably finish off in volume 14. And who knows what else they'll find in the deep levels. Them being stuck on floor 37, Belle's going to get a lot more experience, and he might possibly just be level 5 as well. So maybe by the end of all this, Hestia Familia will have 1 new member in review, and then 2 level 5 characters, and they're probably going to be already like, they're going to be a top tier Familia by that point. And apparently the story is only halfway done with volume 14, according to comments I saw on Reddit earlier. Someone said that Omori Sensei did say that as of volume 14, the story has probably reached its halfway point, and that kind of, knowing that it's at its halfway point, that makes you feel kind of sad, but then you realize that's 14 volumes, so the series, if it's going as planned, it's going to reach nearly 30 volumes, and that's not even counting possible installments of Sword Oratoria and Familia Chronicle. But let's talk about that fight that Belle has with the Juggernaut. The same Juggernaut that appears, and basically, like, for a few pages, the book plays out like a horror film, like people not even knowing what's killing them, and then all these grotesque descriptions of stuff happening, people's heads getting decapitated, guts spilling on the floor, people's brains spilling out. Like, dang! DanMachi has matured from where it was in volume 1 of the story. It's gone very, very far, and has become so much more mature as we've gone on. But that Juggernaut fight, like, I couldn't keep my eyes away from the pages because it was just so intense, and you see those amazing illustrations by Yasuda-san, and then Belle goes ahead and loses his arm. I'm like, dang, I didn't think this is where this was going. But Belle loses his arm and is pretty much down for the count, and then Ryu has the hold up to the Juggernaut for a bit, and then Belle kind of disappears. And what happens? Mari actually finds Belle, and she uses her lifeblood to basically reattach Belle's arm and heal him up. And what I like about that is that this doesn't come from nowhere. Like, this was set up in volume 12, the introduction of Mari, knowing what her lifeblood does, being able to heal people. So this isn't coming from nowhere, like how in volume 10 Fells was able to use that spell to resurrect Wine. Right here in volume 13, we have the context for Belle being able to be healed and his arm be reattached. Oh man. Omori Sensei seems to like arms getting cut off, because we have that guy's arm cut off there in volume 12, and then Jura has had a lost arm, and then Belle loses his arm here. But that first time you see that arm cut off in the illustration, you're just like, whoa, wow. And let's not forget the illustration with the Juggernaut's face and Belle's face. Like, Belle's face looks intense, and he even says game on to the Juggernaut here. I'm like, all right, Belle's ready, he's jumping in. But oh my lord. And then when Belle's revived and Ryu sees Belle fighting, she like I have the quote down here somewhere, like, it says like the hotness and the depths of her chest expanded. Now, I love Ryu as a character, and I would very much like Belle and Ryu to somehow end up together. But I do think the story is heading in a direction where Belle and Eyes will end up together, and I kind of do want that to be the actual thing that happens. But I would not be opposed to seeing Belle and Ryu being together by the end of all of this, because I do think they make quite the good team, as you can see here. And even Omori Sensei, close to Christmas time, in the DanMachi mobile game Omori Freeze, he wrote a Christmas story with Belle and Ryu fighting together in almost kind of the same context, but not really. Like, it did involve an Evil's member, so that was really cool to see. And that also happened around the time of Volume 14, which is very interesting. Like, maybe Omori Sensei wants to get certain points across while Volume 14 is being introduced in Japan. Because in this novel, towards the middle, before the expedition to find Ryu starts, Lily sends a letter to Hestia requesting more allies to help them. And I'm wondering, like, who those allies could even be, because most of the people allied with Hestia Familia are already down there with Belle and company. And the only person I can think of right now is, like, there's Naza, but she's not going to go down to the dungeon. She has PTSD about monsters, and being level 2, she's probably not going to be able to help much with the situation that's going on right now. So that leads me to wonder, like, maybe the barmaids from the pub are going to help, because, like, Anya, Chloe, and Lunar, because in that Christmas story that I mentioned earlier, those 3 go down with Ryu into the dungeon. So maybe Omori Sensei is already giving us a hint of what may possibly happen in Volume 14, like those 3 girls who are all level 4, and Anya has a lot of experience in the dungeon herself because she's been a former member of Freya Familia, so she should be able to guide them down to where they need to go. But it'll be very interesting to see who these allies are that Hestia recruits to go down and help Belle and company. And I love just talking about Ryu, but there is a certain part in this novel when you see Belle on the ground before he's revived by Mari, where it says that Ryu, like, calls out to Belle using his last name, like in Japanese he would be saying Chronal-san, and then after she yells Chronal-san, she yells Belle, his first name by itself. And I don't think Ryu has ever called Belle by his first name alone, like maybe his full name, but not just Belle. And I thought that was a really interesting touch, like almost like a sign of them getting closer and closer together as comrades. But then, of course, after that, she continues to call him Chronal-san. But, oh man, I can't wait to read the scenes between Ryu and Belle in Volume 14. Like, we'll get Ryu's whole story about what happened down there with the first Juggernaut fight and Freya Familia. And I keep talking about Belle and Ryu, but we gotta talk about the other party members in Hestia Familia, specifically Chigusa in this case, because this is something I didn't think we'd see. Like, we get to see Chigusa take some spotlight because apparently she is like the best archer in Takemikazuchi Familia. Like, I call her Deadeye Chigusa now, and I do hope there's a Deadeye Chigusa in development for the mobile game, because that'd be really cool to see, like an actual attacking Chigusa. But of course we have the other members of the group as well, like Haruhime level boosted Oka and Welf to hold back that Lambton. But now they're in quite the predicament of fighting against a monster Rex, the Amphisbaena, or however you pronounce that, but it came 2 weeks early because we're constantly reminded that the dungeon is a living thing, like almost like an organism, and it has like a autoimmune system like humans, where it tries to remove threats. And that's what the Juggernaut was. It was supposed to remove a threat, and it failed to do that, so it went ahead and spawned the Monster Rex 2 weeks early. And that's where we have that big cliffhanger, like Hestia Familia minus Belle and the rest of the expedition group versus that on floor 25. And then we have Belle and Ryu stuck on floor 37 with the Juggernaut, though losing 2 limbs due to the amazingness of Belle, coming after them. But regarding Cassandra's prophecies, most of them have already come true, but some of them, of course, the imagery of Hestia Familia's depths, of course, that hasn't happened yet, so those part of the prophecies have not come true. But even so, Cassandra is making some progress, because she is starting to make things change, just with suggesting Welf to make that glide scarf, because that helped a great deal in that fight against Juggernaut. Without that, Belle would definitely be dead, because his head would be gone, because that thing struck at his neck where the glide scarf was. And man, I did not want to see an illustration of Belle's head flopping off like his arm did. And also regarding Bell and Ryu being stuck on floor 37, even with the supports that Hestia might possibly bring down to help the group, I don't think they're going to make it in time to help Bell and Ryu anytime soon on floor 37. So I'm wondering if they'll actually meet up with other people, because we know that Loki Familia, Hermes Familia, the Xenos, and even Fells are down there in Gnosis trying to clear the place out of the evils. And because we know from the stuff with Jura that they're able to bring monsters from the deep levels into the upper ones, like that Lambton, we know that Gnosis probably extends down to the possibly to where Ryu and Bell are at. So possibly they might meet up with people from Hermes Familia or Lucky Familia. So that'll be very interesting to see if that's where that goes, because it's really hard to imagine what's going to happen to Bell and Ryu being on floor 37, and they're both they're done. They're exhausted, and they have the remnants of the Juggernaut to deal with as well. And I just want to talk a little bit about the cover of Volume 14, because there's some interesting details I see in there. Because we know that here in Volume 13, Ryu's weapon, Alv's Lumina, that wooden sword, was broken. But here in the image of Volume 14, the cover of it, you can see that her sword's right there. Her weapon is in one piece. So I wonder if that's like Yasuda taking some artist liberties and just drawing Ryu with her weapon. Or maybe the Hestia Familia Expedition group, minus Bell, actually beats that Monster X somehow when Welf finds those broken pieces and fixes Alv's Lumina. Because you do get that detail. Like, you see the parts in Bell's clothing where he lost his arm, like that rip is there in the cover art, but for some reason Ryu's weapon is whole. So I wonder what's going on with that. Maybe that really is just artist liberties. We'll just have to see what happens in Volume 14, which is 5 grueling months away. And just a reminder, Volume 14 is going to be more than twice the length of Volume 13, because if you took like the usual Japanese page to English page conversion rate, it's going to be about 480 pages, and previously the longest book was Volume 8 at around almost 400, so this will be the biggest book in the DanMachi series. And originally, Volume 13 and 14 were supposed to be one story, and Omori Sensei had to cut it somewhere, otherwise it would just be too long. And it looks like even though he cut it, he still made 14 super long anyway. So I'm happy for that though, because that just means more DanMachi to read, and it'll take twice as long to read this next installment in 5 months. But I think I discussed a lot of points in Volume 13. I probably missed a lot of them, but I can only talk about it so much before I get exhausted and start forgetting stuff. So I like to know, what are some of your favorite scenes here in Volume 13? What are some of your predictions for what might happen in Volume 14? Please, if you already read summaries of Volume 14, please do not spoil any of that on my channel. I'll just have to block you, because I don't want to see any of that, guys. Please respect the people that want to read the series book by book without reading summaries and spoiling themselves, because we should all be able to experience DanMachi the way we want to, so we should just respect that for other people. But thank you so much for watching my review and spoiler discussion of Volume 13. I hope you enjoyed the video. Just a heads up, Volume 14's release date is August 20th. That is pretty much exactly 5 months away. The hardest wait probably we've ever had to do for more DanMachi content, and this one is just killer because of the cliffhanger that Volume 13 ends on. And sooner than that, on June 28th, we'll be getting the next installment of Sword Oratoria in Volume 9, which is primarily featuring Aiz and her past. So if you haven't started reading Sword Oratoria for some reason, I highly suggest you do, because it is a very good series, despite what the anime might make you think, because I think the anime did a very poor adaptation of the source material, and Sword Oratoria is a very worthwhile read, especially if you want to learn more about Loki Familia particularly. Also, depending on when you watch this video, there's going to be Season 2 news for the DanMachi anime happening in Anime Japan on March 22nd, and that's going to be on a Nico stream. I will leave a link to that in the video description, so be on the lookout for that as well if you're seeing this video in time to watch that stream. But again, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Go ahead and give me a like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this. If you want to stay updated on what I'm doing, follow me on Twitter and join my Discord. And as always, guys, Continue enjoying your time venturing in Rario and the dungeon. This is Lorne, signing out.